recording this to the cloud. Of course, it would help if I had video on, just testing myself to see if I'm paying attention. This is week 12. This is part 3 of week 12. We've been here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't want to say we saved the best for last because that would be it. You know, the first 2 people that came would take offense to that. But I will say that we saved a really good interview and discussion and presentation for this Wednesday in R622 Learning Environments Design course. This is the last leg of R622. And as we mentioned yesterday in this class, there was a special issue of the Educational Psychologist that had really theory articles linking educational technology to educational psychology. And one of the ones that caught my attention was the one that Jered Borup wrote with Florence Martin. And I called Florence, or I wrote to her, I said, Florence, could you like to come and chat about this article? And she was kind to me. She said, you know, I came last semester, and I think I came the year before, and I think maybe I shouldn't come like 3 or 4 times in a row. And she was deadly right. I try not to bring in the same people twice, let alone 3 or 4 times, poor Florence. But Jered co-authored an article called Online Learner Engagement, Conceptual Definitions, Research Themes, and Supportive Practices. And I told Jered that we would put the figures from this article up and he could comment on them. But he said that he's got a presentation that he's already done on this. And why not reuse the slides so he can best utilize his time, effort, thinking, and so forth. But before we go to your slides, Jered, could you tell everybody a bit about your early career and how you started out and then transitioned from Brigham Young University, where you've apparently got your doctoral degree, to George Mason University? And Jered was or is part of George Mason's learning and technology people. I don't even know what the department's called, but he has a special project called GoTech, Global Online Teacher Education Center Program at George Mason. I was the inaugural GoTech Fellow, Global Online Teacher Education Center. And there we go. Wow. Okay, Jered's got it up, and that's your early career. Great. The bus is even there. So, you know, explain that bus.
Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and if you guys don't mind introducing yourself in the chat, that would be really great. Especially maybe what your profession is right now, any research interests that you might have. That'd be really great. So I'll actually start with the bus. This is not me. This is my grandma. She taught in a very small town in southern Utah. And she was a kindergarten teacher and the bus driver. And she also raised teachers, including my mom was a teacher and my dad was a teacher. And I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. And this right here, this is me in the back. I'm the tall guy that they always stick in the back. This is my first day teaching 9th grade social studies. So this would have been 2003. Really came to love everyone in this photo and love that profession. Right now I'm at George Mason University, which is just outside of DC. And really love it here as well. And this is my new academic family in this photo. Some of it retired, but still part of the family. And as Kurt mentioned, this is me with my chair, Charles Graham. And what's interesting is Dr. Bonk, you chaired Charles, right? You're muted.
I didn't chair, but I co-edited a book with him, and we did all sorts of fancy stuff. Well, before, in the early days of the web, he and I designed tools that basically replicated systems like Blackboard and, you know, the other technology, WebCT and others. So we're experimenting in effect. And so, yeah, he's a smart guy, and he nominated me for the award I got a couple of weeks ago, and he also got the David Jonathan Award at ACT. He's done extremely well and we're all proud of him in all his efforts. So yeah, congratulations on working with the best and the brightest. So he's an IST alum.
Well, I owe some credit to you because he always spoke how great a mentor you were. So he's definitely a giant of a man academically, but here you can see he snuck on a chair during my graduation. So this is my chair on a chair, so that he had to be a little taller than me. But just really enjoy working with him. And in fact, he was one of the co-editors for the special issue and invited Florence and me to write that article. So just kind of looking at your introductions here. Thank you for putting them in. Okay, vet medicine. Okay, special education teacher. Oh, great, Emily. Rachel, online faculty are trained to support academic. Okay, great. Yeah, I do some work with faculty development too, with online learning. Design practice and ethics. Oh, wow, Evan, active duty U.S. Coast Guard. Oh, cool. Wait, are you in DC, Evan?
That's correct. I'm right over at headquarters at over in Anacostia.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I'm in Springfield, just off the Beltway, but yeah, that's great. Researching immersive environments. Okay, so these are great great topics. Director of STEM learning. Awesome.
So a lot of these people might be EDD students in our online doctoral program. A couple of them, Alina and Alicia, are visiting scholars from China working with me.
Some great.
Some are certificates.
And Madison, you're in this area too.
Yeah, I walk by this satellite campus every day.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, we should have gotten together. And PhD student in Thailand. Oh, Thailand. Wow. Yeah. Me, that's great. Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm gonna just jump right in. So this was the article that I wrote with, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. So I do have a bit of a cough. I brought my trusty water, but okay, so we wrote an article
Jered,
focused on
Jered,
yeah, go ahead.
Could you tell them you've got varied interests and you fit both last week and this week? Just before you jump into that, just a brief little 30-second or a minute about your background in terms of research and what you've been focusing on.
Yep. So I guess I've been researching for about 13 years now. My first year as a PhD student, Charles and I started doing research on a framework called TPAC. And pretty soon moved to online and blended learning. And coming from my background as a teacher, I really cared about relationships and support. And I was looking at what was going on with online learning, and attrition rates were quite high with online learning. And so I was trying to research how can we better support online learners, especially K-12 online learners. And when I was looking at the field, there was not nobody, but only a couple people were talking about parental support in online learning. And so that's what I try to add to the academic conversation, was talking about how teachers and online programs can support online learners, but also what's the role of the parent and how can the program support the parent in that role. So we've been doing that for quite some time. I also do research on feedback, and specifically on how we can provide feedback using video. So I've done a lot of work with that, just kind of dipping my toe into generative AI and how that can also provide feedback, and how that can be a support for learners, especially learners of English. And with the center that was mentioned earlier, we've been working a lot with teachers of English, and I work with how can we help them to use technology in meaningful ways to teach English around the world. We've done several grants and working with teachers in specific countries, but also around the world with that. And that's just been a kind of a happy surprise with my career. I was not expecting that. but I went to a seminar on how to get funding with grants, and I met Joan King Shin there, and she said, "Oh, well, I'm applying for some grants, and why don't you why don't you join me on this grant?" And ever since then, we've been working together, and it's been probably about 5 years now that we've been doing that work, and it's really been amazing to work with them in all sorts of ways. So I research multiple things, but the core of my research is really learner support
Right.
and online learner engagement. Yeah.
So we did an article for a special issue of the Online Learning Journal that came out in March, and it was the review of the research in online learning during COVID. And
Yeah.
one of the trends was parent support. The research, there was more research on parent support than pre-COVID times, just as an aside. And also my other team is doing research on ChatGPT, AI, and language learning, researching about YouTubers who use ChatGPT to teach languages online. So we're very similar in both of those areas.
Yeah.
And, I've read a lot of your work and always impressed by it. And, I noted some trend towards looking at more global and, cross-cultural things. But that's partly doing work with my friend Joan Kang Shin, that's her area, and that must be due to the grants you guys are pulling in. So congrats on those.
Yeah.
So if you want to go ahead and I'll be muting my mic every once in a while because my dog's been barking at me. So
And Bo, it looks like you've got a friend there too.
She would like
Is
to
this
say
Wednesday?
hello. This is Wednesday.
Yeah, please. Hey, I heard you're a pretty good Wednesday at Halloween.
What do you say? Okay.
Yeah. And true to form, Wednesday would not have responded either. Yeah. So anyway, I'm focusing on learner engagement with this paper. One reason why we care about learner engagement is that we find that it's positively correlated with a lot of the learning outcomes that we care about, right? So engagement can be the goal, but typically it's a means to some pretty important learning outcomes. So the three guiding questions in this research was, what are the research themes surrounding online learner engagement? What are people researching regarding learner engagement? And then what are the conceptual definitions of learner engagement, or how do we define it, first of all? And then the last thing is, how can we support learner engagement? So once we defined it, once we recognize the research, how do we actually improve it? So when we looked at the research, oftentimes they weren't saying that I'm researching learner engagement, but we found that there were some adjacent themes or some core areas in the research that are related to learner engagement. So oftentimes they'd be researching community or presence, especially with the community of inquiry framework, or interaction, communication and collaboration. So oftentimes when you're researching learner engagement, they're not naming it. And so you kind of have to look at these kind of adjacent themes. And that's what we kind of started with. And then we thought, okay, how are we going to define what learner engagement is? And it's tricky. Anyone who's taught, you can say at the end of a lesson, wow, that was great. The learners were really engaged. But what does that mean exactly, right? As researchers, we have to define it for us to research it. And so we kind of reviewed, for this article, we reviewed lots of different definitions of engagement. And one thing that we kind of settled on was that there's 3 dimensions of engagement. And not everyone would agree with this. Some might say there's only 2. Some have listed more than that. But what we settled on, and we kind of, we're seeing frequently, is that there's affective engagement, behavioral engagement, and cognitive engagement, or in other words, engaging learners' hearts, their hands, and their heads. So when we wanted to define online learner engagement, so learner engagement in the online area, one thing that we did is we looked at educational psychology, we looked at the field of educational technology, and we found that they were, speaking of engagement, very different. They both cared about learner engagement, but they're defining it in different ways. Educational psychology focused on the dimensions that I just mentioned. Educational technology or instructional design, they did not typically. They were more focused on the environment and the objects within the environment. So it wasn't necessarily affective engagement. They were saying peer engagement or multimedia engagement and things like that. And so we saw some differences, but we saw some value in both of those. So our definition tried to combine that the best that we could. So we define learner engagement as online learner engagement as a productive, cognitive, active, and behavioral energy that the learner exerts. So again, that's coming from educational psychology field. Interacting with others and learning materials, and or through learning activities and experiences. So that's kind of getting at what instructional designers care about and what they talk a lot about in the literature. And then the environment is online learning environments. Okay, so we end the article with kind of an example of how to improve learner engagement. So we've defined it, talked about the research, but how do we actually improve it? So my co-authors and I, including Charles Graham, and Jungkang Shin has also been working on this with me too. But we kind of wanted to create a framework so that we could better research learner engagement. So here in the center, we have the dimensions of engagement. There's lots of research that shows that it's correlated with desired learning outcomes. But then we also know that it doesn't happen in a vacuum, that there are these facilitators of engagement. So there's the environment, and we've identified the course environment and also their personal environment. There's also support communities, and we've identified the course community and the personal community. And there's also learner characteristics that allow them to kind of engage on their own. And that's kind of self-regulation or social emotional or academic competency skills. So putting this all together, you can see that here in the left image, we have independent engagement. So this is what learners can engage with independent of support. And at the corner of each, or at each of the triangle's corners, we have a dimension of engagement. So cognitive engagement, affective engagement, and behavioral engagement. This is all happening in an environment. So we have the personal environment and the course environment. So the independent, what they can do on their own, oftentimes is less than what's needed for academic success, which is represented in this dotted triangle, right? So there's this engagement gap that's happening between what they can do on their own and what's necessary for success. So to the right, we can see in order to close that gap, we believe that support can help with that to actually increase their engagement. So we've identified two communities. So it's the personal community of support. These are actors within their personal community. So that might be family, depending on the age, it could be parents and things like that. And then the course community is like instructors, peers, success coaches, and any actor that is provided because they are enrolled in a course, in an online course. So the challenge is when we look at this, the independent engagement are these triangles, and it can be in different shapes depending on how much cognitive, affective, or behavioral engagement they can do independent. And you can see everyone kind of has their own triangle. And for some learners, they're good, like this in the corner. They probably don't need a lot of support or any support. You just give them the content and they can be successful. Some might need a little and some might need a lot. And some might need a lot of affective support and not so much behavioral support, or a lot of cognitive support and not so much the others, right? So that's the challenge. I have some examples, but I can kind of pause there if you have any questions. But the idea with the ACE framework is once you've identified the learner needs, then you can start seeing what type of supports they need and hopefully better support their learner engagement so that they can be successful.
We definitely want the examples. So let's pause. I have two comments so far while students are thinking of questions for you. My colleague, Hee-Jun An, who spoke in this class a year ago, has a model or a paper that she's written about hearts on, minds on, hands on, and there's a third one, just same kind of thing that you're going through there, behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, and so forth. So yeah, it rings a bell. I really love your frameworks, and Florence is really good at frameworks, who's the first author of this paper, and Charles, your advisor, is really good at these frameworks and models and so forth. Second is that after Charles graduated, there was a person that came that's very good with technology and theory, and her name's Dr. Sue Booty, or Booty Sue, and she's a chair at Monterey Bay, at Cal State Monterey Bay. And she wanted to study engagement. And she came to my office wanting to study engagement in the online MBA program at Indiana, where we were doing research at the time. And she couldn't find measures, instruments that were good enough to measure it. And it was an ed tech or IST dissertation trying to look at it from an ed psych point of view, as you were pointing out. And the instrumentation was weak, but it's changed over the past 15 to 20 years now. She gave up. She didn't, she gave up. And I felt bad. She was one of the few students who literally had to give up. That being said, she did a wonderful dissertation, and she set the record for defense, the shortest defense I've ever seen. So she's very smart. And even as someone who's so smart, she had difficulty coming up with a viable dissertation idea and research questions and instrumentation. So it's changed. The field has changed. Have you seen any instruments in particular that you rely upon, or you see others relying upon, that seem to have good quality in terms of validity and reliability, are easy to implement, are open access and retrievable, might work across contexts, whether it's adults or high school students? Have you seen anything it's a lot of parameters, but have you seen things that impress you?
Well, yeah, so there are some instruments that were primarily designed for the in-person environment, and they don't really address the unique characteristics and challenges that come with engaging in online learning. We actually, Charles and I and some other researchers partnered with a school in Colombia and developed an instrument that measured affective, behavioral, and cognitive engagement. And then we were also trying to measure the institutional support, or the university's provided support for each of those types of engagement. And so we created it, translated it in Spanish, collected the data, and validated it. And it's actually was recently published in Online Learning Journal, OLC's journal.
Yeah.
The challenge with that, though, that was really interesting is, in this framework, we would expect that the supports for affective engagement would correlate with affective engagement, and the supports for behavioral engagement would correlate with behavioral engagement, and the supports for cognitive engagement would correlate with cognitive engagement. That is not what we found. So we were able to validate the instrument. We found that the data fit, but when we're testing which type of supports actually support the type of engagement, that did not hold true. But what was interesting is that the supports for affective engagement seem to influence all of the dimensions of engagement. So if you're really looking for the biggest bang for your buck, it's developing relationships, getting learners excited to learn about the material. And so while the instrument is validated, we're still kind of playing around with what are the supports that are actually aligned with the different dimensions of engagement. So more is coming with that. We're revising that and trying to figure that out.
You can send us the Online Learning Journal paper, and I'll share it with all the students. That would be great.
Yeah.
At this point, anybody here, participants, have a question for Jered before we move on to other things? Emily seems to have her hand up. Bo has a hand up. Emily, were you raising a hand there? Emily Verga?
Just two quick ones. I was curious, and if you would share that article with us, that would be great. What age group did you study when you were looking at the supports and the impact on engagement?
Yeah, so that was university students. Okay. Interestingly, we're doing some research. So most of my research is at the K-12 level. kindergarten through 12th
Mhm.
grade. And we're actually doing some research in Indiana right now. It's not grant funded or anything. The Indiana Department of Ed reached out to me because of some research on parental involvement. And so this last year, with their help, we were able to collect data from parents across 8 online programs, high school or middle school or elementary school programs. And really insightful. We did survey data, interview data, and we're using what we learned from that qualitative research to start developing instruments that can measure parental involvement, which is a really important part of that personal community of engagement that we see in the framework. So we're just now starting to develop items for that. And when you're developing an instrument, you base it on what you know through the research, and then we're going to have experts review it. We're going to have practitioners review it. We'll kind of do think alouds on it, and it's quite the process. And then we'll start collecting data, and then we'll take that data. We'll see if the data actually fits our model, and if it does, then we can say it's validated within this context, and we can publish it and offer it for free to people. So that's really our goal in this next year is to keep working on developing these instruments.
So I have some advice for my students or other participants. Don't do what he's doing. If as an early career person, to develop instrumentation takes time. And if you're an early career person, especially in a tenure track kind of position, there's a lot of times it's wasted. Not wasted, but the instrument design, development, retesting, testing and retesting, that all, and it may not work at the end of it. It may not be a viable instrument. You may find that, so you have to go back to ground zero. So I made a mistake and developed about 3 or 4 instruments as an early career person, and I don't think any of them went to publication stage or phase. So just a caution. But on the other hand, Jered's trying to develop some of these open access and open source or available for others to use without paying, which is a good thing. We need more of that. So,
we've had some luck with instruments, but you're right that it can be a lot of work. And I will say that I did not do this for my dissertation. It would be a dissertation. Like, it's a lot of work to develop an instrument and validate an instrument.
Can you give us a couple examples of items?
Yeah, so let me go ahead and pull it up.
That'd be great.
Here we go. So I'll go ahead and put it in the chat there.
Oh, okay, so we don't see it in the share, but I see it in the. I could share my screen if you want, but
I can share my screen here.
Okay.
Okay. So here you can see. So in Appendix A, we have the instrument. You can see that there's a bit of an introduction, and again, we were administering this in Spanish. So you have the English and then the Spanish. There was just some kind of background information we're trying to get initially. And then we tried to measure academic engagement. So this is, I highly enjoyed my online learning experiences. I did not feel frustration while learning online. I felt emotionally connected with others. So we're measuring affective engagement here, and then behavioral engagement and cognitive engagement with these. And then you'll see that there's academic support for engagement. And these are you'll see the stem that I have a support community at the university, e.g. instructors, advisors, classmates that help me too. And then we've kind of listed all of these down here. So the full instrument is there. I did want to pull up. So here you can see what we're trying to measure. Shoot, can I? Oh, here we go. Let me make this bigger. So in figure 5, so you can see that we have support for academic engagement. And then under support for affective engagement, we have facilitating communication. So these are other factors or sub-factors that we're measuring, and each sub-factor we had 3 items for them. And so we have support for behavioral engagement, support for cognitive engagement. With cognitive engagement, we had two sub-factors. The interesting thing though is we found a strong connection between support for academic engagement and academic engagement. So that was expected. What was unexpected, what I mentioned before, we expected there to be strong connection between support for affective engagement and affective engagement, and between behavioral engagement or support for behavioral engagement, support for cognitive engagement and cognitive engagement. But that's not what we found. Like there wasn't a strong connection here and here. But when we looked at affective engagement, it felt like that was actually having a bigger influence on all 3 of them than we were expecting. So again, that was surprising to us, and we're still trying to figure that out. But the other thing that I've been working on,
muted here. Before you go to the other thing, let's just point out that this is September 2023 article. This is fresh off the press, so congrats on
oh
that.
man, it'll still get on your fingers. Be careful when you read this article.
I'm sure the galley proofs were just a few weeks ago, so.
yeah. So another instrument that we developed is for blended teaching readiness, and this is for K-12 as well. And so we developed a framework, and then we developed items for each of those things on here. So this is another example of a validated instrument that we've been using with K-12 teachers a lot. So I can put that in the chat too. Yes,
please do. I should have had you working with me long time ago to help my instrumentation.
It's hard, and we did validate one instrument, and then we looked at it and we thought, this isn't helpful. Like, it was way too long. Like, who was going to take it?
Oh,
and so just
items.
because way too many items. And so that's why we actually did a previous one to this, the blended teaching readiness survey. And we thought, well, who's going to take it? In fact, we got an email from a participant. We weren't even asking for feedback, but this teacher found our email addresses and emailed us and said, this survey is way, and had all the A's on there. Yeah. This survey is way too long. And we thought that's a real problem. And so we published it, but then we also created this instrument here.
Are those items open access too?
Yep, that's open access as well.
It's in an article. You can send that article too?
Yeah, and in fact, we've got, let me share with you. We've created a book series using that same model. So these are also open access books that are aligned. So the idea is for teachers to take the instrument, see where they're low on, and then they can go to the content specific book, and they could go to a chapter that they're kind of low on and read that and kind of target that area of support that they need and not waste a lot of time. So anyway, those are also open access.
Yeah. Okay. So EdTech Books was in this class last year. The people, or in my 511, they've been in on my podcast show. But EdTech Books is free. We've got articles from there. Emily, did we get both of your questions?
If I could just ask a follow-up question. First, thank you so much for sharing those resources. I'm definitely excited to dive into them as someone who works in K-12. Okay. In any of the books or any of the work that you've done, I think one of the most common questions I get from our teachers is, And so when I reflect back to the slide that you showed with the learner variability, with the different types of engagement, with the triangles, this is great. Now I know this about my kids, or I have an understanding of what they need, but they really struggle with how to implement it in the classroom effectively. And that goes, I mean, we're talking about differentiating, and I work, the teachers I work with are 7th through 12th. So I think that's something that a lot of our elementary school teachers are much more comfortable with, given sometimes the structure of an elementary setting. But I'm just curious if any of your books, or if you've come across that question in some of your research or addressed it in any of the next steps that you're offering.
Yeah. What age level do you work with?
7th through 12th, middle school and high school.
Middle school and high school. Great. And what is your position?
I'm currently the chief academic officer. I was a former special education teacher. So I do a lot with planning and supporting teachers in terms of professional development.
Yeah. So we have that same question. It's like, okay, we have this measure, but so what? Like you can identify some areas of weakness that need to be improved, but how do we actually support learners or design for learners in a way that's meaningful? So one thing that we try to do, I'll just come back to this book series, is we try to pull in lots of examples. So let's see.
Tell me those books aren't 500 pages long. You know, these got to be short books. You didn't do all those books, did you?
We did. Well,
you're still alive. You're still alive.
Well, we created a template, and you notice, like, so I worked mostly with the elementary education. So these 3 chapters are the same in every edition, and then we created templates for these other ones. And it's even more than that, Kurt, because we created these. We partnered with teachers, and we conducted, I think, 60 or 70 interviews with teachers, and then we had them make these little mini videos describing what they're doing. And it's been a couple years that we've been working on this, but one thing that we did is we learned from this first book that it was really great. People liked the book, but they wanted content-specific examples, and I'm sure that you get this too, Emily. That
all the time,
like, okay, well,
high school teachers, that's really all they want. If you can't make it content specific, they've already tuned you out.
Exactly, and I felt that way as a social studies teacher. It's like, well, that works in math, but you didn't share any social studies examples. And beyond that, it's like, well, you're showing elementary social studies examples, but I teach 9th grade. And so we knew that we had to be more specific in the resources that we provided. So this has been a huge amount of work, but we do offer it for free. So what's kind of great is, for instance, with personalization. So providing students with choice, we have some content, lots of video examples throughout. We try to make it engaging, lots of, teacher examples that might not be in videos as well, kind of how to do this, what it might look like, really trying to show and paint a picture for teachers so they can visualize and either follow that model or receive some insights of what they would want to do. So this is for this, but we also hope to do something similar for this instrument with the ACE framework, where we're creating this survey to measure parental support that's offered. And we hope to create an instrument like this, and then at the end they can receive a score, and it might say, you're a little low on this type of support, you might want to consider offering this support, and then also link out to resources for them. Just short, we understand parents aren't going to give us as much time as teachers, but kind of short one-pagers, tips, suggestions for better supporting learners. So that's the end goal. That'll take at least a year, and we're just kind of starting that this month. But that's the goal, is not only measuring something, but then also providing resources to help them to improve where they're low. And this is an extreme example, I'll admit, to have all these different additions. But that was really our goal, is we've measured it. Now what? So what? Let's give them some resources on how to do it.
That's just amazing.
Thank
But
you.
You'll send me three things now: the online learning journal article on engagement and the instrumentation. This, the blended instrument blended learning readiness, and then third, the link to EdTech Books, your EdTech Books site, so they can all download these free books if they want to. Perhaps
Yeah.
that third is the most important, actually, for people like Emily that want to share with her teachers back there. So, so yeah, I'm glad you showed
Yeah.
books. I'm glad I'm really amazed at what you've done. I know you have other books with Charles and other people, so you've done a lot in a relatively brief career. You said 13 years, but it's it's the first 10 you hardly could do anything because you're just getting adjusted. I know Bo had a question. I know you had your slides you left off with. I do want to get to those. But Bo, you had a question, so why don't you ask it, and then maybe we can see if someone else has a question, then go back to the slides again.
Yeah, I was first gonna just state that I liked the fact that you had built into the model you took into account the fact that there's going to be different types of learners in there who have different needs when it comes to meeting each of these different qualities within their learning environment. So one of the things that I was wondering, okay, that's great that you've considered that. So would you recommend like having your students self-identify with one of those specific levels of support? And then the second portion of that then was, what did you guys take into account at all the possibility that different learners are going to have different levels of motivation depending on the topic or the content area of the course that they're participating in as well?
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right that learner engagement is content and context specific, right? And so it might be kind of consistent within a content area or a learning environment, but once that bell rings or once they log into a different Zoom link, it could be totally different, right? And so yeah, that's something to consider. And then the idea of having students self-identify, I think that's one thing that you can do, and I'm sure that provides some helpful information. I think in these books that I just showed, we have chapters on data practices, and we actually encourage them to collect some learner profile data as well, and some learner preference information. I think that's really important. We also know that learners aren't great at self-assessing sometimes, and so it's a piece of data. It can be really helpful, but I wouldn't end there at all. I think that you've also got to do your own work and figuring out what they need.
I appreciate that. That's good. Yeah.
Anybody else have a comment or a question at this point, or an inquiry or a concern? I know Sohao is down there at IU Southeast teaching psychology classes, so she might find that earlier part of your presentation of interest and maybe have a question for you. So how do you want to make any comments? Maybe she stepped away. Would anyone else like to make a comment before Jered moves on?
I think I saw a hand up, but now it's down.
Who had their hand
Oh
up?
yeah, Rachel. Okay.
Go ahead, Rachel. She's out in your neck of the woods. I had dinner with her. We had a meetup, but unfortunately, it wasn't a huge group. We could have brought you in and Joan in for a huge dinner. I'm sorry we didn't try and arrange something like that, but it was a whirlwind last couple of weeks. So yeah, and in fact, I was trying to get meet with IU alums Jake Enfield, who works at George Mason, and he had gotten sick actually. So I don't know if you know Jake or not. He's in the gaming
I
area.
don't.
Yeah, you should meet him.
Oh.
Smart guy. He graduated maybe 10 years ago or so from for IST, and his wife
I
Pratima
will say
Datta.
that
Hmm?
you are the great connector. I would say you know everyone in the field and their interests and who should meet in what in what room, and it's great. We really, as you were a fellow for us, that was so helpful. We really appreciated it.
Yeah, well, and when we're done here, hang around for a couple of minutes. We'll chat about that. If you can stay.
Yeah.
Jake's wife, Pratima Datta, is an IU IST alum as well, and she's the director of online learning for Johns Hopkins in your area in the DC offices. So there's there's a number of IU alums as well as current students there in that DC area. Probably one of the biggest groupings. So next time I'm out there, we'll try and I don't have my video on it. But yeah, next time we'll try and do that. Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a comment and then sort of a question. And we went to Clarendon's in Falls Church, the beach shack. It's one of my favorite places in that neighborhood.
With Halloween going on night and all sorts of characters and 80s night and everything's going on.
Oh, cool. I don't know the place. I'm not familiar with it.
It's like a Hawaiian beach club. Yeah.
Oh, I'm interested.
Awesome. Anyway, we could talk more about the social things, but one of the things I found really interesting in the article that Kurt shared with us before class and in the list on the syllabus and everything was the whole affective conversation, and about how a lot of the emotions that were discussed were positive ones. And I found in my own teaching that it's predictive of transformative hill. That students sometimes experience negative emotions in learning, and the frustration is always a good sign that they're engaged. I'm just not getting it and I don't understand why. Or even anger, like, why are you pushing me to change? And I personally saw that so many times, and maybe it's my teaching style and I drive my students crazy, but it was always very satisfying to me to meet them there when they were experiencing what some people would characterize as negative emotions. So just to say that, and if you look at a lot of people who are like podcasters, sorry, Dr. Baum, maybe this is you, but a lot of people say the reason that I achieved whatever it was that I achieved is because people told me I couldn't. And that's not everybody's experience. A lot of people get positive support, but a lot of people achieve something surprising to them and to others because they have that negative input. So just kind of an interesting observation about the comments about affective engagement in online learning from your article. But then my question was about agentic engagement.
Right.
Would you characterize that as just active learning or active participation, or is it more self-directed learning?
Yeah. You'll notice we didn't include that in our framework, but I do think that that type of learning is important. We felt that it was more kind of cross-cutting all the dimensions of engagement, and it was hard to kind of isolate that. But I do think that is an interesting dimension or aspect. I don't know if I call it a dimension, but it's certainly an aspect of engagement. And I think you're right that some learner environments, learners are more of an agent than others, and they have more agency than others. And so when we're trying to tap into affective engagement, typically one reason why we have kind of student-centered learning or things like project-based learning where there's lots of choice built into it is to allow them to be, or to allow them to exercise their agency and choice. And I think that's a big part of it. It's a big part of personalized learning, when we talk about that, where it's not the teacher making the decisions, it's the students making a decision. And I also feel like that is a skill that maybe is in that center triangle as well, where it's like, how much can you do on your own? You know, what type of self-regulation abilities do you have and things like that. And so, yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. And I have thought a little bit about that, but in the end, we didn't put it as a dimension, but we do feel like it's an important aspect.
When we get to agency and genetic effects, we start looking at more the human side of this educational technology realm, and in that you were in control of our own learning situations, our decision making, our next moves, wherever they might be, instead of being a pawn of someone else and all the requirements, all the prerequisites, all the forms that have to be filled out. I'm form phobic. I think schools of ed has too many forms for everything. And so I think part of that's because I don't want to be a pawn of someone else, of something else,
Right.
of somewhere else. I want to be in control of my destiny and moving towards something that I select. That's the agentic aspect of the model, if it does exist within your model. Maybe I'll revise that to include that, because otherwise we're creating instructional design. We're going back to old models of doing something to the learner, creating instruction to do something to them, as opposed to allowing them or enabling them to do things that they decide upon. And here's the very big divide between old versions, the old pre-prescribed instruction, Charlie Regulus, my good colleagues' books on instructional design, the green books, versus what today we find in your books, allowing the learner more choice, more options, more goal setting, more personalization, and so forth. And there's a tension there between these two camps, the old camp and the new camp. New camp's not really solidified. There's really no one best design model for this world where we participate in our learning, we contribute to our own learning. We have a say in what's going on, as opposed to always receiving and reacting to stimuli that's been developed by the instructional designers out there. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox here for a little bit, but that's
no, and I think that's great. And Rachel, I really liked what you brought up earlier about sometimes frustration is a good thing. It's an important part of the learning process. And I think Guy said that learning should be pleasantly frustrating. And I love that idea of like pleasantly frustrating, but we don't want learning to be unpleasantly frustrating. Like we don't want them to feel overwhelmed. So you're right that some of those uncomfortable feelings that come with a challenging assignment are important, but we also know that uncomfort or the frustration can also be unpleasant. And you mentioned podcasts just this week. Do you ever listen to Hidden Brain? It's this
one up. Yeah, I did listen to one of those. Yes.
Yeah. He's kind of a fun little podcast that touches on ed psych. And this week it was on, what's it called? What Can We Gain from Pain? And he talks about that a little bit. I mean, it's not the same as reading a lit review article, but it's more entertaining.
Yeah. So the Hidden Brain,
he makes some good points.
Who's the podcaster?
Sean Kirby Dante. I think
Bo will look that up and put it in the
see it
chat.
here.
Bo's really quick at that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah,
so
but
I think
it's kind of a fun podcast on there too. But
so I think we should go back to your slides for just 2 or 3 minutes, and then go back to student questions for a few minutes and close for tonight. So I know you didn't finish your slides, but is there anything left that you wanted to point out? You were going to give some examples. I think there were 2 examples.
No, one example I was going to give is, we've been doing some work with MOOCs, these massive open online courses, and we developed a MOOC for teaching English through English with young learners, and had teachers from around the world take this MOOC, had tens of thousands of people taking it, and our pass rate was way higher than we thought. And we thought, wow, good job us, that's fantastic. And then we learned that these many of the participants were attending MOOC camps, and we didn't even know what a MOOC camp was. That was new to us, and it turned out that there were these centers or these groups that were meeting. Maybe it was at an embassy, a local embassy, and learning together. And so we were really interested in that model where you're taking an online course, but you're actually meeting, congregating in person locally, and all the advantages that can be in a global course where you share the same language, primary language, or the same culture or similar teaching context. So we've been researching that, but I think that's an interesting model with the ACE framework where you can take the course community of support and split it. So you have the online and the in-person. And that was really interesting. I've also done research in Michigan where these high schoolers, we sampled schools where they had some of their local students taking online courses, like maybe 1 or 2 online courses. And some of these schools had like pass rates in like above 90%. We're like, what is going on in these schools? Like, this is really amazing. So we sampled the top performing schools in the state, and we went in there and guess what? These schools were providing them with an hour during the day where they could attend with peers, with a facilitator. And they were the facilitator wasn't a content expert, but they were experts in developing relationships and monitoring and encouraging, and really knowing how to learn online. And so what was really happening, they were online students, but they were learning in a blended environment with all this support. And so there's lots of opportunities where you could see that course community actually being divided, where you have the online and the in-person. And so you can start seeing these really interesting blended models coming out that we're exploring more with the ACE framework to try to better understand.
We're learning from MOOCs, and it was higher success than what you expected. This morning, I presented at the Open Ed conference virtually with my doc student, Shishi Lee, on our Nepal study, kids in Nepal learning from MOOCs, creating a mini community. They've created communities within local schools to help them support each other, get through those MOOCs. And these kids started with English MOOCs and from Harvard. These are kids in Nepal getting certificates from Harvard. And then when the COVID happened, they took dozens, if not over 100 different MOOCs, and they were all supporting each other. So that's one example.
Yeah.
Research in Malaysia and Indonesia shows that in Malaysia and Indonesia, they have this large MOOC, but yet they bring it down to small populations so they can all have a meetups of 100 or 200 people instead of the thousands of people, or 50 people or 20 people and so forth. So that's what's happening there. They took a MOOC and redesigned it. I know in early days that in the New York Public Library and other public libraries in LA were having meetups as well with Coursera MOOCs. So the kids were localizing it, having meetups to talk about what they're learning within the MOOC so they could, correspond and talk about challenges and how they overcame them. So this is a common thing, actually.
Yeah.
A survival mechanism. So I'm glad you've raised many issues tonight that are very relevant to not only this class, but in the spring I'm doing R678. I had an email today asking me if I would take more students since it's maxed out already. But I know some of you are taking that. So Bo, do we have any? I don't think we have questions in the Jamboard, or do we? I didn't see any.
I just checked. It looked like the one that was in there had already been answered, but let's see. Yeah, we're all done.
Okay, so Michelle, Madison, Johan, Emmanuel, any of you have a comment or a question, or anyone I didn't call on? Evan, Lena, Alicia, who would like to jump in with Jered? Amelia in Japan. Amelia, you got some comments. I've been seeing you nod your head several times tonight.
I just thank you very much for coming. I really enjoyed tonight. It's so much information, and every class I gotta reflect on what I learned. And tonight's speech is going to be right up there. possibly a number one. So thank you very much.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. What time is it there now? It's like
It's
in
10
the
a.m.
morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And yeah, I just this is so relevant to everything that is going on, and your instruments that you shared are going to be useful. I'm going to have to take a closer look at those afterwards. But I was actually a learning coach for my daughter's online school when we moved to Japan 10 years ago. And that learning coach was basically, instead of me teaching my daughters to stay at grade level English, they took an online accredited international academy, connections academy, an online school.
Yeah.
But with your talk tonight, I was that integral inner triangle person who
Yeah.
supported my daughters in online. So I had a
Yeah.
really positive experience with online learning in elementary school. And that was back really low tech, where we just took pictures of the assignments or did audio recordings of the readings. So when the pandemic hit, for me, it was just another Monday. I had been online doing stuff like this, supporting learners and stuff, but to see your actual research and how important that effective support is was really eye-opening and validating tonight.
Well, you know firsthand. I mean, when we're interviewing these parents in Indiana, so many of them really rearranged their lives to better support their learners, which is not, I think it's great when that can happen, but it's not exactly equitable across all learners. And so finding a way, which is one reason why I like this, when it's possible to have this on-site facilitator to kind of help and support, where, you know, in that context, it takes a lot of the burden away from parents and makes it a bit more
Absolutely.
equitable across all learners. Yeah.
So that was the other idea that I never thought of a MOOC camp before. And that sounds like a real great combination of online learning and the community support. I just never
Yeah.
thought of that. I never heard of that before. So I'm going to look into that too.
I didn't either until we started teaching that MOOC.
Yeah, well, it's a great idea. So thank you very
Yeah.
much for coming.
So I have
Thank
a big A for apologies to all my students. We have 3 people in a row, all really brilliant folks we brought in. You might be a little overwhelmed with just one guest. This week we have 3 guests, just that's the way it worked out. And you know, so and it's important because last week was on the psychology of online learning. It was with the educational psychologist articles. Peter Shea came, for instance, a couple weeks ago.
Oh, fantastic.
Talked about his
Yeah.
learner engagement idea, or learner presence, social presence, cognitive presence, and the addition of learner presence. And we had Christine Greenhow yesterday talking about social media and so forth, and in addition her article. So now we have 3 of the authors of 3 of the key pieces in that educational psychologist. So that's really, really cool. I didn't plan it that way. This is not pre-designed, as Bo knows. I don't think I had a single guest lined up 2 weeks before the class started. So thank you, Jered, for coming in. Well,
Yeah,
same thing I'll
it's
mention, I'll be meeting up with Amelia in 3 weeks in Japan during the ICCE conference, or pre-international conference in computers and ed in Western Japan. So we'll meet up and talk about what you had to say. Emmanuel, did you have a comment or a question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. I guess I was trying to think like what would be a good question. And I know based on like the talks that you've given people and like with presentations and workshops, what would you say is kind of like your central message that you aim to leave with your audience? Kind of giving you a background in your experience with the online learning environment. Like
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Emmanuel, because that would have been one of my questions. And so thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the core message is that sometimes people test students to see if they can learn online, if online learning is right for them. And I think my core message is all learners can be successful with the right support. So instead of like weeding students out from the online environment, it's what are the types of support that the student needs to be successful. So kind of looking at it at a different approach.
Thank you. It's good.
that goes back to my soapbox earlier. That's exactly it. Instead of weeding people out, how can we weed them in or somehow,
Yeah.
instead of looking at MOOC dropout rates, look at MOOC, completions, and of one completion is a good thing. It's better than none. So instead of looking at the, thousands who didn't complete, look at the thousands who did. So other comments or questions from folks?
I
Yeah,
have
Lena.
one.
Lena and Alicia, my two visiting scholars. Okay, go ahead, Lena.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Jerry. Thank you very much for you to offer this valuable resources and also very interesting research. And I have a question because I also use the MOOC resources in my blended teaching. I wonder, in your research, do you have any practical suggestion for teachers who use MOOCs in the blended teaching? What kind of factors should the teachers pay attention to?
Yeah. I don't know if I haven't done too much research on MOOCs, but from the research that we have done, I'll just say that doing it with a community, recognizing your local support community, you're probably much more likely to be successful if you're learning with them as well. And so kind of identifying your support community locally and leveraging that the best that you can. I think you'll probably have the best experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I started blending with MOOCs, maybe it was 2015 in P540, the learning theories. And I put a whole bunch of MOOCs that were similar to my class, and students could enroll and get a certificate. And if they got a certificate, they could eliminate a final assignment. If they just enrolled and did some assignment, they could eliminate a midterm. So I basically had people exploring and learning from these experts at Harvard and Stanford and other places in learning theories. So it was basically a supplemental tool, the way I used it. And I see increasingly instructors doing that. They're high quality. They're very well done. They're very slick and sometimes very exciting, engaging. Alicia had a question for you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Borup. This presentation is truly impressive. And I'm curious about what research methods have you found most effective in investigating learner engagement within the context of online courses? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll say my dissertation was a correlational study, and I was trying to measure levels of interaction with learner and correlated with learner outcomes, and I was not finding the correlations I thought I'd find. In fact, I found some negative correlations that were quite shocking. I found that parental involvement was negatively correlated with a lot of the outcomes, and so I realized from that study that I wasn't ready to do that type of research, that I needed to do more qualitative research, more theory development and building to better understand what it was, because the framework I was using to develop the correlational study wasn't nuanced enough, right? And so that's what's kind of got me going on these case studies, and I've been doing that for several years in lots of different contexts and areas. Kind of building on the previous research and having this iterative design of how I was conducting research. But now I feel like the next step is to start developing these instruments. And so once we develop those instruments, then that can unlock all other types of research for us and kind of move forward that way with some more quantitative and more generalizable findings. So yeah, I just think it depends on the state of the field that you're in. I think there's always room for qualitative or case study type research, but ultimately for me the goal is to continue to do that research, but also to use these instruments that we're trying to develop to really identify some some practices that can be really insightful and perhaps generalizable to other contexts.
Thank you.
Any last comment from anyone in here or question? Last question?
I can I be the last comment?
Sure, but let's
I'm gonna
make sure
put
that no one has a
something-
last question. No one else wants to jump in? Okay, go ahead, Jered.
Hey, check out the chat. Finally, we have your article up on the GoTech website.
Oh, okay, great.
So if you click on that, you can see your research, your article there, and your checklist there, and some additional information, and your webinar. So anyway, that's been a long time coming, but I'm excited that we're there. So
the recording's there, the article is also there, and the checklist should be there. So the students
Yeah.
might want to click on the, oh, that's nicely designed. Thank you for that. You might want to click on the checklist. And if you click on the checklist, and maybe what I'll do is share my screen if I can find it here. So we developed a checklist for self-directed learning, looking at the course structure, the plans and goals of the course structure, the weekly course overviews and introductions, time management, are there reminders within the course, and back to introductory material, are there video introductions, frequently asked questions, table of contents? So these are all aspects of the environment that's being designed that fosters self-directed learning. If you have, time management reminders, estimated time frames, if you chunk the content, put in progress bars, have some kind of, course content options, so students again can be an agent in their own learning, be it, self-direct their learning, take advantage of those options within the environment. Are there ways to make it more engaging, like gamification? And opportunities for students to interact with one another when they're taking an online class or in particular MOOC. And then we get into application, very important, application exercises, reflection exercises to reflect on what you've learned. And then are there varied forms of feedback? Is there a community that's being built? Is there some kind of automated assistance from AI? So these are the 24 items in the checklist that we've designed in the article. So there's an article that goes with this as well. So if you click on this article, it explains a dozen, years of researching self-directed learning. So thanks. That's cool. Yeah, thanks, Jered.
long time coming. So anyway,
Yeah.
sorry for the delay, and thank you for all your work as fellow. It was really, really great for us and really insightful.
Yeah, well, I'll make sure we try and have a meetup there in DC next time. I want to thank everyone tonight. If you want to put a few comments in the chat window for him. Mi Chen says, thank you so much. Mi Chen, you want to unmute your mic and say hello? Where are you from? Thailand, China?
Hello, professors. I'm from Thailand. I'm like a PhD student from Mahidol University. And then I interested in educational psychology. And sorry for joining the late, because from the previous sections, I really don't have time to join. That's why I joined in the late section here. But this section today is really helpful for me because I got the results for the articles and also got the suggestions and new knowledge from the participant here. And thank you so much. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you for coming. One of my former students, Suthiporn Senjapanroff, has recommended other people. You probably, she's your professor or your colleague.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So a lot of my students like to come back. And Suthiporn likes to learn anything at any time. That's the way learning should be. Thank you again, Jered. Why don't you hang around for a minute so we can chat about the release of the article. And everyone, let's give Jered a round of applause. So we can, thank him for tonight. It's been great. And next Monday, we'll have Lydia Cow with us from Harvard. She's doing a postdoctoral work at Harvard. and soon going to Toronto to work with some famous friends of mine at the University of Toronto. And so that's Monday at 7, and on Monday the 20th, the following Monday, we'll have David Gibson, who's a UNESCO chair of data science in higher education and teaching in Western Australia. He worked, and now he's back living in the US, I think in Vermont. And so he'll be coming to us. He's going to present a paper that just was published in the British Journal of Ed Tech, talking about AI assessments and feedback and all sorts of interesting things. David basically knows everything about the field. He's a gaming person. He's an online learning person. He's an AI person. He's done a learning analytics person. He's done a lot. And so, both will be interesting. Lydia being probably the youngest person we bring in this semester. So a lot of you younger people might have, she's going to talk about AI and her research with Chris Deedy, who was a guest earlier in this semester, and her paper about AI, a short paper. So again, thanks, Jered, and we'll see everyone maybe, possibly next Monday at 7 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.